Matthew 22, verse 1. And again Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, Matthew 23, verse 1. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, Matthew 9, verse 19. And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. Matthew 21, verse 6. The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. Matthew 24, verse 4. And Jesus answered them, See that no one leads you astray. Matthew 14, verse 1. At that time Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus. Matthew 26, verse 6. Now when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper. Matthew 11, verse 4. And Jesus answered them, Go and tell John what you hear and see. Matthew 13, verse 1. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Matthew 15, verse 1. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, Matthew 17, verse 7. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. Matthew 22, verse 20. And Jesus said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? Matthew 17, verse 8. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Matthew 26, verse 1. When Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, Matthew 13, verse 53. And when Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there. Matthew 26, verse 4. And plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. Matthew 27, verse 50. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Matthew 14, verse 16. But Jesus said, They need not go away. You give them something to eat. Matthew 3, verse 13. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to John to be baptized by him. Matthew 21, verse 11. And the crowd said, This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee. Matthew 17, verse 26. And when he said, From others, Jesus said to him, Then the sons are free. Matthew 22, verse 41. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question. Matthew 8, verse 22. And Jesus said to him, Follow me, and leave the dead to bury their own dead. Matthew 9, verse 4. But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, Why do you think evil in your hearts? Matthew 18, verse 22. Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Matthew 1, verse 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew 15, verse 21. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Matthew 20, verse 32. And stopping, Jesus called him and said, What do you want me to do for you? Matthew 22, verse 18. But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Matthew 26, verse 49. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, Greetings, Rabbi. And he kissed him. Matthew 1, verse 25. But knew her not until she had given birth to a son. And he called his name Jesus. Matthew 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Matthew 7, verse 28. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching. Matthew 26, verse 19. And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. Matthew 8, verse 18. Now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. Matthew 16, verse 6. Jesus said to them, Watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Matthew 17, verse 19. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? Matthew 14, verse 12. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Matthew 14, verse 27. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. Matthew 8, verse 14. And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. Matthew 17, verse 18. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Matthew 12, verse 15. Jesus, aware of this, withdrew from there, and many followed him, and he healed them all. Matthew 14, verse 29, he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. Matthew 4, verse 7, Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Matthew 9, verse 30, and their eyes were opened, and Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it."
Matthew 28:16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. Matthew 4:17. From that time Jesus began to preach, saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Matthew 28:18. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Matthew 27:26. Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. Matthew 27:58. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. Matthew 27:20. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. Matthew 1:16. And Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. Matthew 15:34. And Jesus said to them, "How many loaves do you have?" They said, 7, and a few small fish. Matthew 18:1. At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Matthew 20:34. And Jesus in pity touched their eyes, and immediately they recovered their sight and followed him. Matthew 9:23. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion. Matthew 1:21. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Matthew 28:5. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified." Matthew 27:37. And over his head they put a charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Matthew 22:29. But Jesus answered them, "You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God." Matthew 19:26. But Jesus looked at them and said, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Matthew 13:34. All these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. Matthew 27:57. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea, named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. Matthew 20:17. And as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside, and on the way he said to them. Matthew 8:34. And behold, all the city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their region. Matthew 9:27. And as Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying aloud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." Matthew 26:50. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. Matthew 28:9. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Matthew 26:10. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me." Matthew 26:34. Jesus said to him, "Truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Matthew 10:5. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans." Matthew 15:29. Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee. And he went up on the mountain and sat down there. Matthew 21:1. Now when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples. Matthew 24:1. Jesus left the temple and was going away, when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. Matthew 26:52. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword." Matthew 28:10. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Matthew 11:1. When Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities. Matthew 26:57. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. Matthew 27:22. Pilate said to them, Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? They all said, Let him be crucified. Matthew 27:1. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. Matthew 8:3. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Matthew 17:22. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men. Matthew 19:1. Now when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. Matthew 27:55. There were also many women there, looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Matthew 14:31. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of them, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Matthew 19:14. But Jesus said, Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus told his disciples, If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Matthew 26:59. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. Matthew 3:15. But Jesus answered him, Let it be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. Then he consented. Matthew 8:20. And Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Matthew 17:1. And after 6 days Jesus took with him Peter and James, and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. Matthew 19:23. And Jesus said to his disciples, Truly, I say to you, only with difficulty will a rich person enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 21:27. So they answered Jesus, We do not know. And he said to them, Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Matthew 2:1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Matthew 16:8. But Jesus, aware of this, said, O you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Matthew 16:13. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Matthew 4:10. Then Jesus said to him, Begone, Satan. For it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God and him only shall you serve. Matthew 27:11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, You have said so. Matthew 27:27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. Matthew 9:22. Jesus turned, and seeing her he said, Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. Matthew 26:36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, Sit here, while I go over there and pray. Matthew 8:13. And to the centurion Jesus said, Go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. Matthew 27:17. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas, or Jesus who is called Christ? Matthew 26:69. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. And a servant girl came up to him and said, You also were with Jesus the Galilean. Matthew 15:28. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. Matthew 26:75. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Matthew 13:57. And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and in his own household. Matthew 17:9. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one the vision, until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." Matthew 8:10. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, "Truly, I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith." Matthew 9:10. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. Matthew 20:22. Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." Matthew 26:71. And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Matthew 26:17. Now on the first day of unleavened bread the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" Matthew 12:1. At that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. Matthew 16:17. And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Matthew 26:63. But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Matthew 17:17. And Jesus answered, "O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you?